we are going to dive right in. I'm not going to do long intros. You can all look these guys up on LinkedIn. They're all equally amazing. What is probably relevant to know is that Chris, right next to me, is sort of the big deal guy. I'm sorry to stereotype here, but HP and many other companies, the new DXC, that's his expertise, so background. And then Jennifer is sort of the other end of the spectrum. She's really experienced in building high-performance, inside sales, high-velocity teams, so the other end of the spectrum. And then we have, of course, Jan, who wears two hats, right, both coming from a vendor, but also having built a very interesting and innovative and young culture over at SalesLoft. So that's probably enough, and then if they feel I did a poor job, I guess they'll correct me during their first answer. So we're going to go right in. So the title of the panel is How to Build a High-Performance Sales Culture. So the first thing we did when we prepped was, well, wait a minute, like what kind of culture would we like to build? So forgive us, we're going to first talk a little bit about what are we trying to build, and then we'll spend the rest of the panel talking about how to do that. Because when we started prepping and talking about sales culture, we found that we all had strong feelings about a big change that's happening in the industry. That we're going from a rock star, individual contributor world to a sort of systems-driven, science of sales, collaboration, team sport world. So that's a pretty big shift. So we thought we would take a couple moments first and have each of the panelists give their perspective on why is this definition of high-performance sales culture changing. So Jennifer, you'd like to maybe take your first stab at that?
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we always talk about the art of the sales organization and then the science of the sales organization. And I really think that the science is really where the sales organizations are going today, especially from an inside sales model, either if you have a high velocity model or a changing digital footprint of your model. But it's really about measuring those metrics within the organization, measuring those conversions within the organization as well.
All right, so it's changing because I guess there is more online selling, there is more recurring revenue deals, there is more in, I guess also smaller deals, right? There's just more velocity in the business. What about your world, Chris? What is driving this change for you?
Yeah, well, the same that you said. So my background is larger deals. DXC, for those who don't know, we're a carve-out of Hewlett-Packard enterprise business. So we're known for these large, complex deals, but it's fundamentally changing to something very different. We have, and culture is, what's the expression? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's so important. And we are going, for any of those you know, my former company, HP, and then DXC, we're going through a tremendous change. I'm trying to attract the kinds of talent that you see here to a legacy company. So creating an environment where folks can learn, grow, they're given time and trusted. It's challenging to do, but we have to do it to lure the type of talent we want to lure to the company, for starters. And I need to put many more, I have to cover such a wider net, so I need to grow my sales force exponentially. So those are some things that we're thinking about.
What about you, Sean? What's going on in your world?
Yeah, so I think, in fact, selling's hard. Like, buying's even harder. I think we have a buyer's market where they're more informed than they ever have been, and we have access to more tools and technology than we've ever had access to before. So they have to create processes that are steeped in math and science in order to leverage best practices to then roll out to your team and have them scale. And I think what's important is that what they're ultimately trying to do is create the best buying experience they possibly can. And having access to the data that shows how that happens and what triggers some of those moments is critical in that process. But that we're going to keep getting more and more data. So I think the teams that are going to be the most successful are the ones who know how to adapt to what's actually happening versus maybe some of the best practices that they historically did.
Right. So it really seems like there's sort of three big buckets here, right? When we talked about the changes in the buyer, right? Like what you're saying, it's really not selling anymore, it's helping customers to buy, right? So buyer expectations have changed. It sounds like in your case, Chris, that organizational requirements have changed of onboarding more people more quickly. So we no longer have 10 years, right, to become an IBM certified, whatever rep. is. So there's a lot of changes there, and then obviously there's fortunately also more data. So if you use that, you might. So all of these I think are contributing to a very fundamentally different sales culture. So with that, so at least we have some idea, right? So that's the type of sales culture we're talking about: data-driven, help the customers buy, and very sort of science and salesy. So let's talk about how to do that. So maybe the first thing, let's look at people. Ali mentioned that in the intro as well, right? So people, I think there's a lot of interesting analogies with the manufacturing industry. If you think about Six Sigma, and process and the role of process in that industry, but also the role of organization and specialization. How in Six Sigma or designing quality processes, having a conveyor belt, not that equate manufacturing to sales completely, but the specialization, what's happening with that in your organizations, right? I mean, I talk to companies where it used to be one role, and now we have an MDR, and an SDR, and an ADR, and an IS, and we have an onboarder, we have a customer success person, and an account manager. I lost count, we're probably at 7, 8, right? It used to be one job is 7 or 8 jobs, which fundamentally is different. But I'm curious to hear, like specifically in each of your organization, what does that look like today, right? I mean, what have you done organizationally with your organizational design? And let's see, we'll give that question first to Sean. What's going on with that so far?
Yeah, so I think we probably have less complicated teams, probably up here, just based on size. But I think we have inbound reps, we have outbound SDRs that are focused on target accounts. And then we have sales executives and account executives. We recently rolled this out, a new CRO came up with this plan. What it does is it splits up the ownership of new customers, where a sales executive will work to bring on new customers and then also own that relationship the first year. And then an account executive is the one who will be working with them after they've been a customer for a year to go upgrade those accounts. And so splitting really, we've kind of split what was just an AE to down to separate roles, which is something that's pretty interesting. I'm excited to see the results. And then we have sales engineers and sales management.
Do you have pods as well, or how are these people organized?
So we do enterprise is podded, the mid-market and commercial is kind of round robin.
Can you explain it a little bit? I don't know.
Yeah, so
what a pod
on
is.
the commercial and SMB side, we have round robin, the way that you take an inbound lead or an outbound qualified appointment and pass that over to the sales executive. So we have an SMB team, they have an SMB SDRs, we have a mid-market team, mid-market SDRs, the same thing with enterprise. The only difference between enterprise and commercial and SMB is enterprise they have kind of more of a podded, meaning they have like an SDR, maybe 2 SDRs working with a single AE, versus they round robin every single time, which allows them to hyper focus on some of those larger accounts, which is critical when it's a very complex sale. There's only 7 or 8 decision makers in the process. The SDR is just not getting the first one that talks to them, passing over the AE, moving on to the next one.
All right, so there's some inbound, outbound, some farming, hunting, and some pod. What about you, Jennifer? What does your organizational structure look like? What's changing?
So at ServiceMax, we have been there about 6 months, so we've just changed going into the FY18 year, where we have the pod structure, and the pod structure is one ISR that sits in the middle with 2 AEs, so 1 AE here, 1 AE here, and a systems consultant on both of the sides. And we're strategically going after strategic named accounts. And then we do have an enterprise team, and enterprise is really not SMB for us, it's still the high-level enterprise accounts. The Fortune 5,000 instead of the Fortune 2,000. But really, in talking about the pod structure, you really have to look at the teaming aspect of it. And that's where, having the metrics and the numbers that we talk about behind it, and making sure that you're all having the common goal, instead of just being, like you said, the rock star in an organization. It's really about the team.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, what kind of metrics are you putting in place for those teams that might be interesting for people to know about?
Well, obviously revenue is always the #1 metric, so we want to measure the ACV and the TCV. But what is also important is the kind of the funnel. If you look at it from the top of the funnel, being the leads that are coming in, that we call them AQL, NQL, whatever they're called within your organization, and then how they move through the sales stages. And so it's really those conversion rates and how they move through the sales stages. And what we found last year is we had a lot of things at the sales stages getting stalled at the very early stages and not moving. So now we're really having a lot more rigor around where you're going to enter those sales stages, when you move those sales stages, and from an inside sales perspective, we're very interested in how far those sales stages are moving, and that they're not just sitting there at like stage 2 or stage 3, that they're progressing, and that we have the specific metrics to measure those. And in the past, and I'm sure many of you have seen this in the organization, something will come in at stage 4 and then close quickly, but it's been sitting there for a long time, or a lot of skipping around. So if you put it in at each stage and have some rigor around that, then you can start measuring those metrics and then having something to be more scientific about being able to say, okay, if we have these conversion rates, then we need X.
Can you give an example? I mean, when you say rigor, or when we have these conversion rates.
So, for example, if we want to do on our relationship working with marketing, we can now go back to marketing and say, we know of the number of leads that come in, there's this conversion rate, the number of MQLs that come in, they're converting to the stage 0 X%, and then what those are down further. And so we can go back to marketing and work with marketing and say, this is the number of leads we need, this is the number of AQLs we need. And then we can also look at our own teams and say, what percentage of our contribution are we doing?
How do individual reps experience this? Do they actually get to see the conversion rates? How the conversion rates play into
they're starting to.
reps?
And you were talking about you're working with your reps. I love to sit down with the rep and say, it's a math game. Look at your quota and go backwards. It's a math game. So if you make 20 calls a day and you know that the connection rate is 18%, how long is it going to take you to get to the quota versus if you make 30 calls a day and you know these are the conversions and the connection rates. So it's a math game.
Is there any comp tied to that as well?
Oh, of course, it's comp tied to, this year we're tying comp to sales stages and close business and the conversion of
What do you mean by
sales.
sales stages?
So where it comes into the sales stage and how it converts through the path. So you're almost paying them double. So if something comes in at stage 0, and then you're converting it at a later point to stage 2 or 3, we're also measuring it back to make sure that we have it going through the funnel. And then close revenue.
Got it. That makes sense. What about you, Chris? What's happening with metrics in your organization?
Yeah, if you think about it, I was thinking about org design. There's a number of things we're toying with, and the best segmentation for us is deal size. So we still do quite a bit of large deals. So a deal over $100 million will get the pod concept. We have a special team of business development reps that actually are paid on qualified pipeline, which is a newer muscle and newer group. So once they find and qualify, and they get a portion paid for that, and then they hand it off to a pod, to a senior team, and the pod is solution experts. And we do have like a small army that go into these large deals. At the next level, as you said, specialization has become so important. We used to be a generalist sales organization, so we could sell. Our portfolio is as long as my arm, so it would be, difficult for anyone to talk intelligently about any particular service offer. But now we've got a lot of specialization. So a coverage team at 6,000 clients, and when people cover those accounts, they'll find an opportunity and bring in a specialist, like a Navy SEAL, to go after a specific opportunity, and they'll share in that credit as well.
In your case, specialization is more around products or industries, is that right? Rather than, right, the other specialization is around stage, right? You see now the specialization with the maybe the MDRs doing research, and then the SDRs, right, setting up the meetings. What you're talking about now is a different dimension of specialization.
It's a different dimension of specialization. However, we have entered into the world that you guys described. Embarrassingly, we didn't have an inside sales team until about 2 years ago. For the kind of work we do, it didn't lend itself to. We didn't think it lent itself to this kind of interaction model. I took that up to my CEO and said, no, let's try this differently, and we built something called the Digital Experience Center, the DEC. And it was early career folks who are incented to identify those early stage opportunities, and they're credited with generating that early stage piece of business. We focus them on some again, even further specialties as a foot in the door, but we just built that. We've hired about 100 people in that organization across the globe, and it's working well for us.
Interesting. What do you attribute that to? So initially you thought maybe it's not applicable, but what do you think makes that work well for you?
Well, we needed to be faster, much faster in responding to our customers' needs. You can imagine the things we sold would be assemble that large team, and the selling process takes quite a while on both sides. But we needed to be faster in responding to customers. Deals were getting smaller. The portfolio is much more of a package portfolio today. So again, I mean, my competitors are IBM, Accenture. We're all trying to go towards more of a package that could be sold differently. So that's also what led to it. And then we didn't have a farm system, so we would only hire someone with 10, 15 years of experience and had a proven track record. And those folks are few and far between. So one of the basis for this deck was, hey, we need to bring in a new crop of sales talent, teach them, grow them, and bring them through so they can eventually do these larger deals. So that was another impetus for that team.
Okay, and what is a typical path for a deck person?
Yeah, it's not typical yet, but we had a couple interesting programs. We hired a lot of ex-military, and we put them into the deck. They were senior people that never had sales experience. It turned out to be a phenomenal program for us. They went right from this year of training inside sales, which I don't love the name inside sales, but that's what, I guess it's the best way to think about it. It was digital selling. They would go to an account and run a business for us. So people who run, platoons and troops now running a big account from this this experience. Generally, the process is, you enter the deck, 2 years, grow into a specialty salesperson in one of the business units with 9 business units, and then even to the larger deal teams, something like that.
Okay, makes sense. Now we touched already a little bit on compensation, which I think is obviously not your favorite topic, so let's make some time for that. And particularly in light of, as I said in the intro, it feels that there is this fundamental shift, right, in the days of individual contributors where you compete for business, and if you didn't make it on stage at sales conference, the CEO would nudge you and say, hey, that fucker, he's taking money out of your pocket, right? So it's really a one against the other, right? You hire athletes, people compete with each other, etc. Versus, I think the modern world, right? If you believe in the science of sales or the system of sales, then it's a team sport, right? That any contribution to make the system better would benefit everybody. But that's completely different behavior, right? I now want not competition, I want collaboration. So I'm curious how you're dealing with that in your organizations through comp. What is happening with comp to encourage that kind of behavior?
Yeah.
I'm going to take it first, Jennifer. Chris?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. We put team bonuses, so I'd have teams that establish the team. There'd be a team target, so you might have a pot of, in the deck in particular, 4 folks working together. They have an overall goal and then individual targets. We now, everyone, we have 6,000 folks in our go-to-market organization. Everyone has a customer satisfaction metric in there. Everyone from CEO through that organization, which gets everybody focused on that experience that Sean was talking about, from first contact all the way through. So that's another bit. And then we do pay for business development. We pay for a qualified pipeline.
Jennifer, what's happening in your organization?
Yeah, we have a net promoter score as well, but we haven't pushed that all the way down to sales. But I like that actually.
It's new for us, first year.
Yeah, I like that idea actually. We're paying on qualified pipeline, we're paying on closed business, we're paying on operations, specifically in the inside sales group. And we're paying on that teaming model. It's the individual as what they do, but also it's a teaming in particular with our organization, what they do with the field sales organization and the pod that they sit in.
So is there a part of are you saying that there's part of the comp tied to the team, or it's all individual still?
The individual efforts is on building the pipeline and the conversions of the pipeline, but the teaming piece is on revenue. Right?
Yeah.
But there are within our organization we're really focusing on the net promoter score. So that is the interesting aspect to put into the sales organization, because I know it's being pushed down in many other parts of the organization. And then, of course, we're all about filling the pipeline, right? Having X amount in the pipeline. So I think that's really important to focus on that, and that's being focused on across the company.
And then how do you, and comp obviously, we want to talk a little bit about KPIs, but comp, there's also, I guess, the role of the manager, right? And how is, what's changing with that? I mean, managers, we hear a lot about coaching. I guess these days, maybe more so even than training. But how do you turn managers into coaches to help, again, enforce the behavior that you want to see?
Sure. I want to touch a little bit on the compensation.
Yeah, of course.
Because when I was running the sales development team a few years ago, we were doing a very straightforward compensation structure where you booked a meeting, you got paid, right? It was that simple. And as we grew, we realized there are lots of other elements involved. When you comp, you get whatever you comp is what they're going to do, right? So period. And so we knew based on the research that we've done after we had, had done a bunch of handful of deals and all that, we knew what the process looked like. That it wasn't the number of calls, the activity number that we were going to keep them accountable for. It was the number of positive conversations. We knew that for every 5 positive conversations, they would have 2 appointments booked. And if their goal is to get 2 appointments booked today, that's 5 positive conversations. And I don't care how many calls you make, as long as you have 5 positive conversations. And what that started doing, interesting enough, is that they weren't just saying, okay, I got to make 50 calls a day or whatever, running down their list, they're dialing and moving on to the next thing. They were calling the same people that they knew were qualified prospects more and targeting their message even better. Because once you know if you have a person who's in your ICP and they're the right person to talk to, the decision maker, why would you just call them once and move on to the next person when you know that if all you have to do is have a conversation with this person that's qualified? So that really changed a lot of things when we started measuring the positive conversations that turn into comp. And the second thing that happened is because, first of all, when you go from SDR to AE, there's lots of training that has to happen. And you weren't doing our SDRs justice by only comping them at the handoff, which they're making a clean handoff to the AE, moving on to the next one, because they were never learning anything about the sales process from the point where an opportunity is created. And so now they have a piece of the pie as far as closing one deal goes, and they're more and more involved along that process of getting other decision makers or keeping that relationship strong. So I think from a training aspect, it's helped tremendously on getting them ramped up to become AEs, because ultimately that's where most of them go, some go account management, some recruiting. But that was probably the 2 biggest key things that we changed from that.
How does that sort of break down by what percentage of comp is tied to each of those elements you just mentioned, like closed business, meaningful conversations, etc.?
So the meaningful conversations are direct comp. It's the activity metrics that they have to keep on standard in order to keep the job, right? That's what we measure on a weekly basis. I think it's about 80% of the overall compensation comes from the actual opportunity created or being booked, and then they get a percentage of the closed one deal that makes up the other 20% of the overall compensation.
Interesting. All right, I'm looking at the clock. We're already having a yellow sign, which means we probably need to move the questions from you. This is kind of like speed dating panel. There were a couple of things we didn't get to, one of which I do want to leave you with, which is more of a plug maybe for a session. I don't think he even knows I'm going to plug it, but just sort of these new roles, like something very interesting that I've seen emerge is that in support of a lot of the things that we're talking about here, we see new jobs emerging within the sales cycle. For those of you who were in the Google talk earlier on the other side, right? I mean, Olivia has a sales strategy title, and she has a team of 7 sales scientists who are actual data scientists. Steve Brody, who will be in the Q&A this afternoon from MuleSoft, go talk to him. He has business process optimization engineers, within his organization, his sales organization. So I think it's just interesting how, right, we're all trying to figure out how to move this to the science of sales, but it's actually creating new jobs. I don't think any of the panelists here, so you don't have to ask them that. I asked them, did you have any of these new jobs? Like, not yet, but anyway, you can ask anything else. I think we have only about 3 minutes or so. If you do have any questions, quickly jump to the mic so that it gets picked up by the recording right behind you. So if you want to line up there, and any questions for any of the panelists?
Jennifer, you talked about filling the pipe as a major focus. What ratios do you think about in terms of how big the pipe needs to be, and how do you know when it's enough?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because, you know, I've been around a while, and in the old days, if you were at 3x pipe, you did pretty good. And we're seeing that you really need to be about 5x pipe in our particular organization. But before you even look at that in the earlier stages, I think it needs to be 8 to 10x. And I hate saying that because it didn't used to be that way. It used to be a lot lower. But I think because of the digital environment we're in and the competitors that we have and everything else in the world, I think our pipes just need to be a lot larger than they used to be.
Yeah, I would second that. Go ahead.
Awesome. For Chris, you mentioned that you have team bonuses, and I love that. But say that 90% of your sales reps are hitting and one person's not. How do you kind of speak with that person and coach them through not putting a bunch of pressure on themselves, coach the rest of the team through not, purposely being upset with them? How do you handle that?
You know, in this scenario with the deck I was describing, actually the team took care of itself. There would be a team of 4, and if someone wasn't pulling their weight, knowing that everyone's bonus was dependent on this person being successful, the team would actually, the system sort of took care of itself in coaching that person. When there were situations, and as there were, when someone couldn't, rise to the occasion, they got voted off the island. Literally, like the teams would say, "Hey, we've tried everything, and this person's not performing," and then it would get escalated. But they tried to take care of themselves before escalating to management. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
By the way, there's a super interesting video you should all watch by Simon Simon. I think it's called Why Leaders Eat First. And anyway, it talks about biology and team processes and very relevant.
And Shauna, my question was for you. You mentioned tracking positive conversations. How do you go about measuring what exactly a positive conversation is?
Yep, great question. So really you need to define what that is in your own organization, but suggestions we get are interested, you have another follow-up call scheduled, you book the demo right there, you're moving on to the discovery call. So whatever is going to lead or be an indicator to there's progress moving forward. So it could be a next stage, if you stage things out, but really it's not call me in 6 months, no, those are obviously not positive conversations. And then we track it through our dialogue system that we're all in Salesforce and all that. So you need to define it and then just measure it.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Thank you.
All right.
I'll make a quick comment on that. Your tool, SalesLoft, helps do those types of things, and you can have the disposition.
All right, I think we're out of time, but I'm sure the fellows happy to hang out on the side, on the back of the patio and answer more questions if you have any. Thank you so much for your great